Sir, this isn't a museum. We don't accept lunchboxes as collateral. The young man behind the desk said it loud. Loud enough that the woman at the next station turned her head. Loud enough that the security guard near the door looked over with a half smile, like he had heard a joke. Walter Hennessy, 71 years old, did not smile back. He set the dented black metal lunchbox down on the desk between them. Slowly, the latch clicked once against the wood. Then he looked at the young man across from him, and he waited. "It's not collateral," Walter said. "It's evidence." The young man laughed. Two of the other employees behind the counter laughed with him. The sound carried in that small bank lobby in a way that bank lobbies don't usually carry sound. Walter heard it. He did not move. The foreclosure notice in his coat pocket said First Henderson Savings would take his property in 43 days. 81 acres in Henderson County, Kentucky. The land Ruth had walked every morning for 36 years. The land where she was buried under an oak tree on the south slope with a stone Walter had carved himself. The notice said he owed $312,000. The notice was wrong. Walter knew exactly how it was wrong. The proof was inside that dented black lunchbox. But the young man wasn't looking at the lunchbox. He was looking at his watch. "Mr. Hennessy," he said, "I really do have a meeting at 11. Walter nodded once. He picked up the lunchbox, and he walked out of the bank. Walter Hennessy was born in 1955 in a rented house outside Corydon, Indiana. His father rented every house he ever lived in. Worked for the railroad 41 years and died with $800 in a savings account and no land to his name. Walter watched that. Walter learned from that. He made up his mind young that he would never sign a rent check past the age of 30 if he could help it. He moved to Henderson County, Kentucky in 1974, looking for work. He found it at Briar Creek Iron Works. Took the second shift because it paid 40 cents more an hour. Carried a black metal lunchbox into the foundry on the first day, and carried the same lunchbox out of it 41 years later when he retired in 2015. He met Ruth Pettigrew at a church potluck in 1976. She taught 5th grade at the elementary school. She was the kind of woman who kept every receipt. Walter once joked that she filed her grocery lists by year. Ruth had not laughed. She had looked at him in a way that made him understand that this was not a joke to her. This was how a person held on to things in a world that took things away. They married in 1978. In 1979, they bought their first 20 acres of land for $14,000. They financed it through First Henderson Savings at a fixed rate of 9.25%. Walter remembers signing the papers in a small office that smelled like cigar smoke. He remembers the loan officer was an older man named Phil Calloway, who shook his hand at the end and said, "Don't ever miss a payment, son, and this land will be yours." Walter never missed a payment. Not once. Not in 40 years. They bought the next 31 acres in 1989. They bought the last 30, the parcel with the oak on the south slope, in 1996. 81 acres total, paid off in full by 2008. In 1991, the foundry shut down for 11 months during a strike. Walter did not cross the picket line, though crossing would have fed his family faster. He worked nights at a feed store in Owensboro instead, an hour's drive each way, 6 days a week. Ruth sold piano lessons out of the living room. When the strike ended, Walter walked back into the foundry on the first day and never spoke a word about the 11 months that had passed. The men he had stood with on that line remembered it. Walter never reminded them. Ruth had walked the property line every Sunday morning of her adult life. She said it kept her mind quiet. She knew where every fence post was, every spring, every place where the deer crossed. When she died of pancreatic cancer in 2019, Walter buried her on the south slope under the oak, because that was the spot she had stood at the most often. The lunchbox was dented in 1987 when a section of overhead pipe came loose at the foundry and dropped onto the bench during the lunch break. The lunchbox saved Walter's left foot. He had kept the dent for 39 years. Ruth had once asked him why he didn't just replace it. He had told her some things deserved to be remembered. She had not argued. She had just lined the inside with parchment paper so it would be easier to clean. What Walter did not know, what he would not learn until later, was that beginning in 2016, Ruth had begun using that lunchbox for something else. She had been moving the most important papers in their life into it. The mortgage records, the yearly statements, the letters, She never told Walter why. She had told him only one thing about it. 3 weeks before she died, sitting in the kitchen with the late afternoon light coming through the window behind her. "When the bank comes," she said, "take the lunchbox, they'll laugh." She had paused. Let them. Tyler Drennan was 34 years old. He had an MBA from Indiana University, a wife named Brittany, and a corner office at the First Henderson Savings Branch that he had been promoted to manage 2 years earlier. His division was called Legacy Asset Recovery. It had a quarterly performance dashboard. Tyler's name had been at the top of that dashboard for 6 straight quarters. The dashboard tracked something the bank called underperforming long-hold agricultural accounts. It was a category Tyler had personally helped design. The metrics were simple. Accounts paid off in full, but with active reverse equity lines were ranked by acreage, location, and proximity to development corridors. The top-ranked properties received priority review, a process that in 18 months had resulted in the foreclosure or forced sale of 14 separate parcels in Henderson and Webster counties. Walter Hennessy was the eighth. The trigger on Walter's account was a $180 late fee dispute from 2021, a fee Walter had contested in writing in a letter Ruth had filed away before she died. The bank's internal review had reclassified his fixed-rate loan as variable rate during a system migration in 2020. Tyler's team had identified the reclassification as a recoverable opportunity. They had compounded the difference back to 1979, applied late fees, and produced a notice claiming Walter owed $312,000 on a property he had paid off 17 years earlier. Tyler had personally signed off on the foreclosure filing. The filing had taken him 11 minutes. The audit logs would show that later. 11 minutes to undo 40 years. But Tyler was not the most dangerous part of the machine. The most dangerous part of the machine was a man Tyler had never publicly been photographed with. A man named Carl Pruitt, who had been the mayor of the nearby town of Cloverport for 11 years and who sat on the board of the Henderson County Development Authority. Pruitt's brother-in-law held a 43% stake in a small LLC called Briar Creek Holdings. Briar Creek Holdings had quietly acquired 6 of the 14 foreclosed properties in the past 18 months. Each had been rezoned within 90 days of acquisition. Each had been resold to a regional warehouse developer at a markup averaging 240%. Walter's 81 acres sat directly along the proposed Briar Creek Industrial Corridor. He was, by Tyler's spreadsheet, the most valuable acquisition of the year. Walter drove home from the bank that morning the same way he always drove. He did not speed up. He did not slow down. He carried the lunchbox down the basement stairs to the workshop. That was where Ruth had moved it after he retired in 2015, into the bottom drawer of the tool chest his father had given him in 1973. Walter did not know why she had moved it there. He had assumed she wanted it out of the kitchen. He had not asked. He pulled the cord on the bare bulb above the workbench. He knelt in front of the tool chest. He opened the bottom drawer. The lunchbox sat where it had sat for 9 years. He set it on the workbench. He stood for a long moment without opening it. Then he undid the latch. The inside was lined with the parchment paper Ruth had cut in 2007. The papers were organized by year, each year in its own bundle, each bundle tied with a piece of twine. 41 bundles, the earliest from 1979, the last from 2019, the year she died. He started with the oldest, the original loan documents, Phil Calloway's signature in fountain pen, the fixed rate of 9.25% printed plainly in box 7. Walter set it aside. Then 1980, then 1981. Each year, every payment stub, every annual statement. He read them slowly. He read them all. The bundle from 2017 was the one that stopped him. Underneath that year's statements, folded twice and tucked between 2 receipts, was a letter on the city of Cloverport's letterhead, dated June 3rd, 2017. Addressed to the board of First Henderson Savings, signed by Mayor Carl Pruitt. The letter referenced 8 specific agricultural parcels in the Briar Creek corridor. Walter's parcel was the 3rd one listed. The letter proposed what it called a coordinated review process, a phrase Walter did not yet understand the weight of, and it referenced a meeting that had taken place at the bank's downtown office on May 29th of that year. At the bottom of the letter, in Ruth's careful blue ink, were 2 lines. Filed by error. Sender did not realize the CC, and below that, smaller, they are coming for the land. Save this. Walter read it twice. Then he read it again. He sat down on the wooden stool beside the workbench. He looked at the lunchbox. He looked at Ruth's handwriting on the bundle's twine label. He had to wait a long time before his hands were steady enough to fold the letter back the way she had folded it. He drove into town that afternoon to see a lawyer named Margaret Holloway. Her father had drawn up Walter and Ruth's wills in 2004. Margaret had taken over the practice 3 years ago. She was 52, careful, slow to commit, deliberate the way her father had been. She read the foreclosure notice first. She told Walter the same thing she had told 3 other clients that year, that foreclosures from First Henderson were notoriously hard to fight, and that the cost of doing so often exceeded what could be recovered. She was being honest with him. She did not want him to spend what little he had left on a case he might lose. Then he handed her the letter from the mayor's office. She read it once. She set it down. She read it again. Then she looked at Walter and she said, "Mr. Hennessy, I think we need to call somebody besides the bank." Walter nodded. "I think you should call them today," he said. The federal courthouse in Evansville is a small building. The hearing room on the second floor has wood paneling that was put in during the late 1970s and an American flag in the corner that has not been replaced in 19 years. The room was cold the morning the hearing began. Walter wore the same gray suit he had worn to Ruth's funeral. Ruth had ironed his shirt the morning of the funeral. 7 years ago, he had not worn the suit since. Margaret had told him to wear it. She had not told him why. Tyler Drennan arrived at 8:45. He came with 3 lawyers from a firm in Louisville. They wore charcoal suits and carried matching leather folders. Drennan himself looked smaller in court than he had behind his desk. He sat in the second row and checked his phone twice before the judge entered. Walter arrived at 8:53. He walked in alone. Margaret was already inside. He sat down beside her without speaking. The dented black lunchbox sat on the table in front of them. Latch closed. Judge Harold Mancuso entered at 9 sharp. He had 23 years on the federal bench. He sat down without ceremony, opened the file in front of him, and asked both sides to state their case. The bank's lead attorney spoke for 19 minutes. He spoke about underperforming legacy accounts. He spoke about administrative reclassification. He spoke about the bank's duty to its shareholders and the regrettable but necessary nature of recovery actions in agricultural lending. He used the phrase legacy artifacts twice. He never once said Walter's name. Margaret stood up when he was finished. She did not raise her voice. She did not raise any papers in the air. She walked to the bench, set down 2 documents, and stepped back. "Your Honor," she said. "The first document is Mr. Hennessy's original 1979 loan agreement. Box 7 contains a fixed interest rate that was unilaterally reclassified by the plaintiff's institution during an internal system migration in 2020. The reclassification was never disclosed to my client. The arrears the plaintiff is claiming arise entirely from that undisclosed reclassification." She paused. The second document is a letter dated June 3, 2017, on City of Cloverport letterhead, signed by Mayor Carl Pruitt, addressed to the board of First Henderson Savings. The letter references my client's property by parcel number. It proposes coordinated review of 8 properties in a development corridor in which the mayor's brother-in-law holds a 43% interest. The letter was CC'd to my client by error. The judge picked up the second document. He read it once, then he read it again. Slower this time. The room was quiet for a long moment. The court reporter's hands rested on the keys without moving. Drennan looked at his attorneys. His attorneys looked at the floor. The judge set the letter down. "Counselor," he said, addressing the bank's lead attorney, "can you tell me, on the record, what process your client used to review Mr. Hennessy's account before initiating foreclosure?" The attorney started to speak. He stopped. He started again. He looked at his co-counsel. Then he looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, I would need to consult with my client." Judge Mancuso nodded once. "I imagine you will," he said. He recessed the hearing for 90 minutes. It did not reconvene that day. It did not reconvene that week. Within 19 days, the foreclosure was withdrawn in full. The unilateral rate reclassification was reversed for all affected accounts at the branch. 47 accounts in total. Walter was awarded $340,000 in damages, with the foreclosure costs and legal fees paid by the bank. The bank's letter of withdrawal arrived at Margaret's office by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. It was 3 sentences long. It did not mention Walter by name. Margaret read it twice, set it down, and called him at home. He answered on the second ring. Tyler Drennan was suspended from his position the same week. He was indicted on federal wire fraud charges 7 months later, and on a Wednesday afternoon in early March, 23 days after the hearing, Mayor Carl Pruitt resigned from public office, citing what his statement described as personal matters. The federal investigation into Briar Creek Holdings is ongoing. Walter did not tell anyone for 2 days. On the third day, he drove into Cloverport in the same truck he had driven for 22 years. He went to the county clerk's office and paid a $47 utility bill, because that was the bill that had come in the mail that morning. And because that was what he had planned to do that day before everything else had happened, the clerk behind the counter, a woman named Diane Latham, who had known Walter since high school, was on the phone when he came in. She looked up. She had heard. Walter could see in her face that she had heard. She put the phone against her shoulder and started to say something. Walter just nodded at her. She nodded back. He paid the bill. He drove home. When he got back to the house, he carried the lunchbox down the basement stairs to the workshop. He folded the letter from the mayor's office the way Ruth had folded it. He tied the twine around the 2017 bundle the way she had tied it. He placed the bundle back into the lunchbox in its proper place between 2016 and 2018. He closed the lunchbox. He set it back in the drawer. He closed the drawer. Then he went outside. He walked across the yard to the south slope. The oak tree was just past the fence line. Ruth's stone was small. He had carved it himself. He stood there in the late afternoon light without saying anything for a long time. Then he said, "You always knew where to put things." He stood for another minute. He turned around. He walked back. The land gives back what you put into it. Ruth had said that once. She had said it the way she said most important things, quietly and passing, as if she was talking about the weather. Walter never argued with her about it. He never had reason to. Walter Hennessy was not the only one. There were 7 other families in Henderson County who received the same letters, same rate reclassifications, same quiet foreclosures. The next story is about a woman named Eleanor Bishop who got her notice on a Tuesday in October, and what she found in a coffee can on the top shelf of her late husband's pantry changed everything. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you there.